accused of manslaughter for underestimating the risks of an earthquake that killed more than 300 people. Prosecutors in Italy say 7 experts provided an incomplete, inept, unsuitable and criminally mistaken analysis of a powerful quake. It's a case causing concern among seismologists. Should science be put on trial, and can man be held responsible for acts of God? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Taimur Nabili. It's a case that has caused outrage in the international scientific community. 6 scientists and 1 government official have endured 1 year and 30 court hearings with manslaughter charges hanging over them. They're accused of failing to sufficiently warn the population of a medieval town before an earthquake hit it in 2009. The 6.3 magnitude quake killed 309 people. Defence lawyers argue quakes are impossible to predict, and holding scientists to account will dissuade them from sharing their expertise in the future. Claudio Lavagna reports from L'Aquila.
Vincenzo Vittorini calls it his own Pompeii. His home reduced to rubble in the earthquake that devastated the medieval Italian town.
The life as I knew it was over in a second. It wasn't even a rumble. It felt like a monster that sucked us into a black hole. All of a sudden, it was all dark.
His wife and daughter died in the disaster when his house collapsed. He was the only survivor. The town had suffered months of seismic shocks. In the middle of the night, the earthquake, registering 6.3 on the Richter scale, killed more than 300 people. More than 3 years later, L'Aquila is still a ghost town. Experts agree that if the earthquake came during the day, then many more people would have died. But now families of the victims say that if the scientists didn't downplay the risks of a powerful earthquake, then their relatives may still be alive.
They told us it was all okay, that the frequent tremors were a good thing because they discharged energy. That's why that night we stayed in the house, against our habit of sleeping outside during these tremors.
Scientists from around the world have called the trial a witch hunt and signed a petition in which they call it unfair and naive. Claudio Lavagna, Al Jazeera, L'Aquila.
Well, to discuss the events in L'Aquila in Italy, I'm joined by 3 guests. In Rome, Valerio Rossi Albertini is a physicist and a professor at the University of Rome, and so one of the scientists on trial also teaches. In Copenhagen, Kristian Lauta is an expert on disaster law and a member of the Copenhagen Centre for Disaster Research. And in London, David Rothery is a senior lecturer on earth sciences at the Open University and author of several books specialising on volcanoes, earthquakes and tsunamis. Gentlemen, thank you all for being with us today. I should point out that we are recording this show before the verdict of this case is released. We're expecting it at any time. But essentially what we're trying to discuss here is the premise of this case and the kind of questions that it throws up and the potential precedent that it might set. So let me begin, first of all, by asking each one of you for your own impressions from your own particular positions and expertise, how you interpret what has been going on in Italy. And let's begin in Italy. Valerio Rossi Albertini, tell me what the mood is in Italy, not only in the scientific community, which you're a part of, but in the general community overall.
What can I say is that this trial is not very popular in Italy. Not many TVs has been reported on this fact. Instead, in the scientific community, of course, we are very worried for what may happen. What the scientists did was just to say that the probability of occurring for an earthquake was not influenced by the previous tremors which were recorded. And so we are expecting if this may imply a legal judgment on them and the possible final result of this trial.
Okay, Kristian Lauta, from a legal perspective, how do you look at this case?
I think the case is emblematic for a global development that goes on right now. We see the same thing in Japan, where a number of people are raising cases at the courts. There is an increased need for instruments to discuss justice in connection with disasters. I think the case serves as a perfect example of this development and this need for legal instruments and a platform to discuss faults and responsibility in the aftermath of disasters.
David Rothery, as Kristian has pointed out there, the implications from this are rippling around the world in the legal community, and I'm sure in the scientific community too. What do you think about what's going on?
Well, I think the legal situation may well be different in different countries. Some countries will just hold an inquiry into what went wrong. Clearly something apparently went wrong because the public were persuaded that there wasn't a significant risk, and then a disaster happened. Well, you're in a no-win situation when trying to make a comment about an event which may happen in the future. If you evacuate people unnecessarily, you can get sued for loss of earnings, and the tourist industry can say you've made our town sound too dangerous. If you don't evacuate people and they die, you're in trouble, as we see in the present situation. So it is a very tricky situation, and how to handle it in different parts of the world is going to depend on the legal system and the culture in different countries.
Part of the issue also is what the science of it all involves, as you've pointed out. I mean, what exactly are the responsibilities of these scientists? And let's look a bit more closely at that. They're accused of not communicating the risk of the earthquake clearly enough. But the question has to be asked, is there really any way to predict such a natural disaster? I'll ask you about that in a moment. First, though, Tarek Bazley has been taking a look at these issues for Inside Story.
Seismologists monitor rock movements around fault lines to gauge where pressure is building up. It tells them where earthquakes happen and how often on average, but it doesn't tell them much about when or how big the next one will be. There are also those who believe animals hold the answer. A population of toads was seen leaving the area before the quake struck L'Aquila. But it's hard to study because earthquakes are so rare and apparently random. There are also plans to launch a satellite later this year to look for a link between electrical disturbances in the ionosphere, the upper atmosphere, and large earthquakes. Rocks in the Earth's crust compress and fracture in the run-up to an earthquake, and as they do, they generate an electrical current between the ground and the atmosphere. Spotting this effect could give us a few hours warning before a major earthquake hits.
Well, David, let me come back to you on the science issue in particular and ask you, I mean, from the perspective of the charges levelled against these men, what they're accused of in part is giving incomplete advice, which raises the suggestion that perhaps it's possible to give complete advice in the case of an imminent earthquake. Is that possible?
Well, maybe with hindsight they could have given fuller advice, but it depends how much advice is going to be listened to by the people who are passing the advice on to the public. These scientists were part of the civil protection organisation in Italy, so they're not the scientists researching earthquakes, they're the scientists engaged to talk to civil protection. It's not the scientist's job to say we'll evacuate the town, it's the job of the civil protection authorities in almost every country. They make the call on whether to evacuate.
Valerio, let me put the same question to you. I mean, from the perspective of a scientist, exactly how precise can you really expect to be on issues like this? And within Italy, what is expected of you as a scientist in these cases?
In fact, I can answer as a scientist more than a seismology because I am a physicist. But from this point of view, what I can say is that scientists have just to comment on data, on theories. They can just report what is expected according to a theory. If an event is unpredictable, then you cannot expect that they can say more than it is available to themselves. That's why it is, of course, a tricky subject, this announcement, but it is always very difficult to balance between underestimate and overemphasize an event that cannot be predictable.
Can you explain to us, and again, this is not a science question, and perhaps you weren't involved in those conversations in L'Aquila before the earthquake hit, but one of the problems here being the extent to which those scientists persuaded, if I can use that word, the people of L'Aquila that an earthquake was not imminent? I mean, is it thought in Italy that they went beyond their responsibilities in persuading people not to be frightened?
It is also in this case it's difficult because people are not discussing about this subject openly. What I can say is that the scientists can express the concept in terms of probability. What they stated is that the probability was not higher than usual. This is what they said. Then, of course, it was variously reported and the sense may have changed. But this is what they said, that the tremors did not influence the probability of a strong earthquake.
Kristian, what does international law tell us about the duties and the responsibilities of scientists in cases of disaster?
I don't think there's any particular responsibilities. Just to comment on the case of the matter, as I understand it, they're not accused for not being able to foresee an earthquake. Rather, they are accused of not telling the public everything they knew. They knew there was a residual risk that they chose not to inform the public about. And I don't think this is a case about scientists. This is a case about a public response system that these scientists were part of that chose not to inform the public of the full picture that they had available knowledge of. In this case, that there was a residual risk of a major earthquake.
But again, the question being, what is their legal responsibility? Not informing them of everything they know is a very broad category of information that really opens up a lot of doors, doesn't it?
Absolutely, but to quote Spider-Man, with great powers comes great responsibilities. In this case, the state, if they choose to say something about the possibility of an earthquake, it should be accurate according to their own knowledge at least. Shouldn't hide something in order to protect the population. I'm certain you can be responsible for that in most legal systems. I don't think there is an international standard of responsibility for natural disasters. But I do think that there is an international standard under development, and I think this is general picture. You see it in Japan. You saw 1 million claims after Hurricane Katrina. You see it after almost every major disaster today, that we have a number of claims against public authorities, against private companies, against governments.
David, let me get you to comment on that.
Well, it is a very difficult situation. I don't think the scientists should be in the dock for this. There's clearly an issue about communication and understanding of risk on behalf of the public and the civil authorities. I'm pretty sure the scientists did not say
think they shouldn't
no
be in the
earthquake
dock,
will happen.
But as Kristian was saying, there are many scientists in the dock around the world with varying degrees of similar kind of accusations against them. And it seems that we have indeed opened a Pandora's box here into all sorts of potential lawsuits.
Well, maybe we have, and we have to see whether the verdict of this trial, whichever way it falls, how that propagates around the world. As I said before, I'm not sure that this will set a benchmark, because there are different legal systems in different countries, and with different kinds of natural disasters, there's different amounts of preparedness you can engage in, and different amounts of prediction you can do. And you can never predict anything with absolute certainty. That's the trouble. In Italy, they know that one day Mount Vesuvius will erupt and they're going to need to evacuate Naples. Now, they think they need a fortnight to do that, and they will see warning signs building up, and somebody's got to say, we're getting into that final fortnight, now's the time to call the red alert and evacuate the city.
That's actually a really interesting thing to bring up. Let me put it to Valerio. Have the media, the legal system, the scientific community in Italy asked themselves that very question? What on earth are we going to do when the prospect of Vesuvius going up presents itself?
Yes, what happened is exactly this, that there was not, I think, a common judgment on the right behavior to be taken in this case. What I can say is that the problem maybe should be shifted, not focusing on the trial to scientists that cannot be predict what is not predicted by the theory itself, but maybe we should use this occasion to reflect on the possibility to improve the safety. The implementation of safety should be the main concern of Italy, because we are a seismic territory.
Right.
And along with the traditional methods, now there are new technologies that could be used
Okay,
to
can
minimize
I just stop you there for a minute,
because
because I want to get into the actual technology and the preparedness in just a moment. But just from the perspective of responsibility still, I mean, as a scientist, are you now feeling more insecure in publishing your work, in publicizing your work, in actually making any predictions because of the threat now of possible action against you in case someone decides that you haven't told them enough?
Yes, this is possible because, of course, we are feeling very strongly this trial, and we don't have the sentence yet, so it is maybe too early to understand it, to realize what the consequences can be. When the verdict will be expressed, we will try to understand and to reflect on how to behave in the future.
Kristian, a lot of this falls into your area of expertise, though, doesn't it? I mean, and I want to sort of take you up on what seems to be so far in your answers a slight hedging in your position here, because don't we have to be more clear on this issue? Isn't it incumbent upon the legal community to actually draw very clear lines for the people involved? Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves in this situation, and it's going to be very damaging to all parties.
Absolutely. I think that's a very important point, but I think cases like this put focus on it and forces us to make legal reform and consider make efficient, how we can make efficient and just instruments of responsibility and transparency and disaster response in general. The fact is that disasters today are understood as social events, so we need to treat them as such. They are caused by mistakes, by imprudent planning and by lousy engineering, as well as tremors of the earth. So I just think it's important that we take it seriously, and cases like this illustrates that we need to have instruments able of assigning responsibility of some sort to the involved parties.
Okay, David, so
does that answer?
Let's move on from this, David, and talk about how the future landscape should now be shaped by the people involved in these decisions.
Well, one thing we've not touched on yet is the earthquake resilience of the buildings in which the people died. It's not the earthquake which kills people, it's the buildings falling down which kills people.
And that's something that Valerio did mention there, and it's probably worth getting into. I mean, in Italy, a 6.3 earthquake caused 309 deaths. In Japan, a 6.3 earthquake would barely trouble anybody.
That's right. A lot of the buildings in L'Avellino where people died were quite old structures, and it's very expensive to retrofit old structures. But my understanding is that some new buildings, which should have been earthquake resilient, also fell down. And if you're in a new structure which falls down, you've got to ask, was it built according to the seismic codes? Were corners cut? Was the right grade concrete used, and so on? So I'm surprised that the only people on trial are the people charged with saying what the risks were and possibly miscommunicating them. There are also people responsible for making sure that at least the modern buildings would stand up to a 6.3 earthquake, and they didn't all survive the earthquake. Some of them were badly damaged and fell down.
Valerio, is that the case? Are the only people being prosecuted here scientists? Is there any investigation going on into the preparedness, into the structures that were damaged?
Yes, the investigations are going on. This is just a part of the total trial. What was said by the other guest is absolutely correct, in the sense that the most important thing is the implementation of safety, because it is not a matter of trying to get from scientists more than they can say, but to minimize the effect of an unpredictable event like an earthquake. We know that Italy is a very seismic territory, a seismic land, so earthquake to occur must be expected. And what we can do, since the traditional, the standard methods for the implementation of safety are too expensive, is to use new technologies to do this. Of course, it cannot be done immediately. It takes time, but it is something that must be said very strongly. This is the time to change our way of thinking about earthquakes.
And again, you know, is the Italian government actually making those decisions, asking those questions, implementing anything new? We've had a year's worth of prosecution of scientists. Have we had a concurrent and as intense a move towards making things better for the next time?
Yes, the government, of course, is doing his own job, but it is not just a matter of this government. It is a very long way to the implementation of safety in Italy, and so it must be something transversal, something that should be in the list of the administrators, of the governments, and all the public institutions.
Kristian, let me just ask you about the results of this case and the impact it will have on international thinking in legal circles. Will it stand as a precedent for anything, whichever way it goes?
I don't think so, no. I think it has tremendous importance as to open the public eyes for the possibility of this, but I don't think it will serve as an international precedent in legal terms. I think we've seen this development of a need for legal instruments, at least since Hurricane Katrina, and I think we will increasingly see it in the future.
Don't you think it possibly might open the door towards frivolous cases brought against anybody who suffers from a natural disaster?
Might serve as an inspiration and as an eye-opener, but I don't think it serves as a legal precedent, no.
David, Kristian mentioned there Hurricane Katrina, which I guess is a fairly decent analogy here, because we haven't seen anything like this kind of action against the scientists in America, and they had far more warning of an impending disaster, and they had probably better scientific data to suggest an impending disaster.
Well, my understanding of hurricanes is you can spot a hurricane and see which direction it's travelling, but you don't know exactly where it's going to hit the coast. So with Katrina, they won't have known until 6 hours beforehand it was going to go perhaps right over New Orleans. So there's a limit to what you can do in the time available. Do you want to evacuate a major city every time there's a hurricane, which in 2 days' time might come over your city? Or do you want to just batten down the hatches and hope for the best? It costs a lot of money to evacuate. People get killed in evacuations. So it's a very fine balancing act. Somebody has to make the decision.
Are you hearing in international circles, very quickly, in international circles, are you hearing this conversation being conducted and any kind of conclusions being arrived at? Very quickly.
I'm not hearing anything in particular because of the current trial in Italy. Discussions go on all the time in the field of natural hazards about how it's a no-win situation. If you evacuate unnecessarily, you're in trouble, you've damaged the economy. If you don't evacuate in time and people die, you're in trouble. So whichever way you call it, you can be doing it wrong. It's a matter of judgment, and you can't always be expected to get it right.
A no-win situation is probably the most apt conclusion that we have to go with so far, and that's probably the last word we're going to have on this for today. Gentlemen, we've run out of time. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us. My thanks to Valerio Rossi Albertini in Rome, in Copenhagen, Kristian Lauta, and from London, David Rothery, joining us to talk about the L'Aquila trial. Thank you also for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. You can always send us your feedback to the show. Email is insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching, and for the moment, goodbye.